I'm glad to be here, and I will be moderating these two world-famous speakers after the session. So I'll just tell you their names. I just met them, and since I didn't know what they were going to talk about, I will do so afterwards, after they talk. So Bob Keefe, here on my left, he is the executive director of something called E2, which tries to advocate for smart policies that are good for both the economy and the environment. Is that why it's called 2? Yeah, all right. That's not the only thing you do. And then we've got Jamie Skaar, who's the founder and CEO Luna Energy Partners. And it's an energy consulting firm, and you come from Tacoma, Washington. Did you fly down here today?
I live in San Diego.
Oh my gosh. I thought you come from, okay, you live in San Diego, also not too far away. Okay, a small upgrade, yeah. So I want to welcome you both, and thank you very much, and welcome.
All right, thanks everybody. This is funner than I thought. Thanks everybody. Again, my name is Bob Keefe. You got that right. I'm the executive director of something called E2. And what the heck is E2? We are a national nonpartisan organization of now more than 10,000 business leaders who work across just about every sector of the economy and just about every state in the country. We actually got our start here in California about 25 years ago, actually in the Bay Area, when a couple of our founders from the Silicon Valley area started working on what then were the first ever greenhouse gas tailpipe emission standards in the world, AKA the California Clean Car Standards, that revolutionized really the auto industry. And our founders had a simple idea. Maybe we can do something good for our environment and do something good for our economy at the same time. And for some of you who may have been here 25 years ago when that was happening, of course, the auto industry and the oil industry was coming into town and saying, hey, you crazy Californians, pass that law, and it's going to ruin our economy. It's going to put us out of business. The world's going to go to hell in a handbasket, and California's going to float off into the Pacific, and that's going to be the end of everything. And our founders stood up and said, wait a minute, we don't know anything about cars. We don't know anything about petroleum, but we do know something about innovation. And we do know that with the right government signals, with the right policies, we can actually drive innovation. And again, 25 years ago, maybe those Prius thingies that we're starting to see, maybe those will become more popular. And who knows, maybe even electric vehicles someday. And by the way, it's not a bad idea to clean up the pollution in the world's 5th biggest economy, especially when most of the people here like to go to the beach. So that's how we got our start. We went from the handful of people in Silicon Valley to, again, 10,000 members and supporters across the country and 9 chapters, including a great one here in San Diego. We often do chapter events, not too dissimilar from something like this. If you're interested in it, you should check us out at e2.org. I've also, as others have alluded, wrote a couple of books. My background, I spent about 25 years as a journalist, so I don't really have any skills, except I know how to put a pen on a piece of paper every now and then. So I wrote this book, Climatenomics, about 3 years ago. And it's basically about the economics of climate change and the economic cost of climate change and the economic benefits of climate action. And the premise was basically, look, if we pass some good policies, maybe good things will happen. The second book that just came out about 6 months ago, Clean Economy Now, is the story of what happened when we passed those policies. I want to before we get into the topic of this discussion, which is our way forward, I thought I'd talk a little bit, just a little tiny bit about my past and a little bit about the present. So I've lived in Carlsbad on and off for 20 years. I went to Washington for 6 years. I made parole and I hightailed it back here as quick as I could. But I've been in Carlsbad more or less for almost 20 years. But before that, I spent 10 years in Tampa, Florida. And I was a reporter for the St. Petersburg Times down there, and every reporter for every newspaper in Florida has covered a couple hurricanes and lived through a few of them as well. But I can tell you that there's nothing that I ever covered or saw like what just happened in Florida about an hour ago, just as we were getting started here. Milton made landfall just south of Sarasota. I think it came in as a Category 3, which is great. Well, not great, but it's better than a 5, which it was. And it didn't get stuck in Tampa Bay, which is really great because that would have caused a lot of damage. But still, it's going to be one of the worst hurricanes on that side of Florida in at least 100 years. Quite ironically, today, actually right about now, I was supposed to be on a plane to North Carolina. I grew up in North Carolina. That's where my home is, but where I was raised anyway. But I was supposed to be there for a wedding in the town of Asheville, North Carolina. And I was supposed to be flying today. That got canceled because of something else we've never seen before, which is Hurricane Helene, which came through a week ago and literally wiped towns off of the face of the planet in parts of western North Carolina. And if you don't know that area, you know, it's one thing to see a hurricane hit Florida. Asheville is about 2,000 feet above sea level, about 300 miles from the ocean. And it's probably the worst storm we've seen in this country in a very long time. I've actually got a staffer, part of our E2 staff. He's based in Asheville. And for the first 3 or 4 days after the storm, we couldn't raise him. We didn't even know if he was alive. And then we learned that they didn't have power, they didn't have cell service down there for a long time. I literally just talked to him for the first time earlier today, and checked in with him and saw him on video. And he told me about hunkering down in his basement and outside of Asheville as the wind was howling and trees were falling all around him. And he said it was the most terrifying time of my life. And then the flooding started in his basement, and the flooding started coming up, and he basically spent the night with his wife and his dog Bodie, plugging holes in the underneath doors and wringing out towels and staying up all night trying to clean that up and stay dry. I asked Zach his name is Zach Amata, I asked him to send a couple pictures that I could share tonight, and this is what he sent me. This is basically his house in there somewhere. You can't really see it because there's too many trees. There's one sticking out of the side right there in the middle. If I know how to use a pointer, I would, but I don't. That's his street on the right-hand side. What's left of it, about half of it's gone. And he's without power and water there, as is that whole area. It has been for more than a week now and will be for some time. So, you know, that's kind of a bummer. And I know I was supposed to talk about some good stuff here. And the good news is we have some good stuff. The good news is that it's a little late for places like Asheville. It's a little late for places like Florida right now. But finally, we are starting to do something about climate change in this country. 2 years ago, we passed something in Washington called the Inflation Reduction Act. Anybody heard of that? Okay, there's a lot of people that haven't heard of that, just for the record. The Inflation Reduction Act and my organization, E2, and a lot of others worked our tails off getting lawmakers to pass that bill. But it basically is the biggest and most important climate policy in the history of the planet. The IRA invests about $370 billion into climate-related and clean energy-related projects in this country. More importantly, it sends the market signal to business that this country is moving in the right direction. And as a result, companies are investing in America. My organization, E2, has been tracking actually clean energy projects that have been announced since the IRA. And what we now know is that there's almost 350 major clean energy projects coming out of the ground in America right now. We're talking about electric vehicle factories, battery factories, solar panel factories, hydrogen hubs now, places that are building heat pump hot water heaters and heat pumps that we're putting in our houses now. $129 billion in private sector investment. That's not government loans and grants, just to be clear. That's money that companies are investing in America. 112,000 jobs already announced. That's just in 2 years. When is the last time we've seen that kind of investment in America? Maybe the Industrial Revolution, I think. That's why I call this a revolution. I truly believe that we are at the advent of an economic revolution in this country, the likes of we haven't seen in generations. And it's because we finally decided to do something about climate change. This is what my organization is all about, by the way. And look where it's just as important as to how much is happening, the volume is where this is happening. Check this map out on where things are happening. This isn't California, this isn't hippies in California doing this stuff, folks, anymore. It's not tree huggers in Brooklyn. Look at the top states for these projects. Michigan's at the top, mainly because of the electric vehicle, the move to electric vehicles by every automaker in America. But look what's next. Georgia, South Carolina, Texas, North Carolina, Ohio, Tennessee. Not exactly what you would what a lot of people would think about when they think about a clean energy revolution or climate action. But this is happening, and it's important because I truly believe if we're going to change the perception of climate change and clean energy and environmentalism, it's going to be by making it a pocketbook issue. And when you have these jobs, when you have these investments going into these states, it makes it a pocketbook issue. Now, when I was writing the book, I traveled around the country quite a bit, and I met that guy. I met that guy in a place called Dalton, Georgia. Anybody ever been to Dalton? You've been to Dalton? Okay, not too many people. Dalton, by the way, Dalton is a couple hours north of Atlanta. It at one time was the carpet capital of the world. If you bought a piece of carpet, if you bought a piece of flooring, it probably came from Dalton. This stuff right here probably came from Dalton at one point or another. And if you lived in Dalton, you worked in the carpet industry. This is a guy named Robert Howie. Robert grew up in Dalton. His mama worked in carpet. His daddy worked in carpet. His uncles, his aunts worked in carpet. Robert worked in carpet for a little bit, but guess what? Robert didn't want to work in carpet. Problem is he didn't have anything else to do. So he did the only thing he could figure out, and he joined the Navy, learned a little bit about being an electrician on a ship. And in the time he was gone and the time he got back, a company called Q-Cells decided to build a solar panel factory in the little town of Dalton. The IRA got passed, the Inflation Reduction Act got passed. Q-Cells decided to build a second factory, then a third factory. I think now they're building a fourth factory in Georgia. Well, Robert came home, applied for a job at Q-Cells. He told me he didn't even know what a solar panel was. He knew a little bit about electricity and so forth, so that came in handy, but he didn't know what a solar panel was. But he got a job there. And I said, Robert, what did your buddies down at the carpet mill say when you told them you were going to go work for a Korean company making solar panels? And Robert said, oh man, they said it wouldn't last. They said, you're crazy, you live in Dalton, you work in carpet, and those guys, that's fly, but what the hell is a solar panel anyway, And since then, he's been there about 2 years. He's had like 3 promotions. He's making more money than he ever imagined making. And I asked him not too long after that, I said, so Robert, what are your buddies down at the carpet factory saying now about that crazy job you took? And he said, oh, they're saying, how do I get a job there? So that was an opportunity that didn't exist in that town, and it's helping people like that. Robert actually has become kind of an ambassador for clean energy now. When big shots come to town and want to tour the factory, Robert's one of the guys that gives them a tour, including that woman there. I don't know if you know who that is. That's Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's probably the most conservative, climate-denying member of the U.S. Congress right now. Did I mention that Q-Cells factories are in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district? This is what is going to be probably the biggest solar panel production facility in the Western Hemisphere, and it's in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. But here's the thing, that's not actually unusual. Let's look back at those projects that I mentioned, those 350 projects. If you look at them where they're going, you saw the states. we broke them down by congressional districts. More than 60% of these projects are going into Republican congressional districts. Those little dots depend on, those red dots, of course, are Republican, and the blue dots are Democrat. The bigger the dot is, the bigger the investment in that region is. But about 60% are in Republican congressional districts. If you look at where these jobs are growing, you know, it's not California, honestly. You know, California still continues to have more clean energy workers than any other state in the country. One of the other things my organization does is track how many people work in this. One thing we know is about 3.3 million Americans work in clean energy right now. California is still the biggest state, but look who the fastest growing are: Texas, Kentucky, Alabama, West Virginia. Again, not exactly, you know, hippie communes in a lot of these places that are hugging trees and living off the land. Now, I say all of this because, not to be political in any way. It's actually the exact opposite. I say this because it's clear, if you look at the numbers, if you look at what's happening, there should not be anything partisan or political about creating jobs. There should not be anything partisan or political about investments in America, making America more competitive, and doing it, by the way, all over the country. So that's one thing to think about. When I was writing the book, I also went all over the country, but I wanted to tell you a couple other stories from the clean economy now. And one of them is right here in our backyard in Imperial Valley. Some of you have probably been to Imperial Valley. It's a beautiful place, kind of, sort of. You know, Imperial Valley is the second poorest county in the state of California. It's also one of the most environmentally, it's an environmental disaster area that's almost unmatched, at least in California, if not the country, in part because of the Salton Sea and a lot of other issues out there. Imperial Valley also has, frankly, been on the forefront of clean energy as well, because if you've ever been there, you've seen those big towers and pipes, tangles of pipes and all that kind of stuff. It's one of the biggest geothermal production places in the state and I think in the country. I think there are 12 geothermal plants there that basically take that hot, nasty brine from under the Salton Sea and underneath there. They pump it up those big pipes and the heat turns a turbine and it provides electricity maybe as far away as over here. Now, after the IRA was passed and people started talking about the expansion of electric vehicles and the need for batteries and things like that, a lot of people started looking down there and they came to a realization of something. All that hot brine that's coming out of the ground, they basically pump it up, they use the heat, they pump it back into the ground. What they didn't realize, because they weren't really looking for it, was that it's also full of lithium. Lithium, of course, is the basic component of batteries. So now you have a lot of very rich people investing a lot of money in a very poor community. One of the biggest owners of those geothermal plants is Berkshire Hathaway, which is run, of course, by Warren Buffett, one of the richest and smartest investors in the world. But think about that. So you have the richest guy, one of the richest guys in the world now investing in one of the poorest counties in California and bringing new opportunities at that area that it desperately needs. They're calling it Lithium Valley now, and not unlike Silicon Valley. Hopefully they'll do it right and it'll bring a lot of opportunities. The last story I wanted to tell you about from my little road trip was, not that I didn't actually go to this one, but that big factory right there is in DeSoto, Kansas. That is a battery factory. It's probably one of the biggest battery factories in the country, if not the world, that's being built in little DeSoto, Kansas by Panasonic. Now, what was interesting about that to me is that if you've ever been to DeSoto, Kansas, there's not a lot out there. They grow some wheat, they grow some corn, and that's about it until the 1940s. And after Pearl Harbor, the Department of Defense built a huge munitions plant out there because preparing for the invasion of Japan. They needed as many bullets and bombs as they could build, so they picked little DeSoto, Kansas, to build a munitions plant, the Sunflower munitions plant. And if you read the old stories and you look back at what was happening back then, people were lining up for miles in their cars to go to little old DeSoto, Kansas, because they wanted to work at this factory. Today, Panasonic, a Japanese company, is hiring thousands and thousands of workers at that plant that used to make bombs that they dropped on Tokyo. To me, that's just kind of a cool little story, but it also shows just how this is happening all over our country. Now, I want to talk about, I'm going to wrap up here in a minute because Jamie's a better speaker than I am, but I want to talk about a couple of things real quick. First of all, when we talk about batteries, I'm going to go back here for a minute. When we talk about batteries, this is also significant in another way. If you think about things like batteries, solar panels, wind turbines, we invented all that stuff here. You guys know that, right? We invented the solar cell here. We invented a professor named Robert Goodenough, pretty cool name, in Texas, came up with some of the first designs of the lithium-ion battery. Henry Ford, of course, invented the mass-produced automobile right here in America. And then we lost it all. We invented solar panels, but guess what? Today, 80% of all solar panels are made in China. We invented the technology between the lithium-ion battery. China and a few other countries like Panasonic in Japan and LG in Korea and a couple others now have about 90% of the battery industry. We invented mass market cars here, but China is way ahead now in electric vehicles, and just about every European country has more of them on the road per capita than we do. So if we're going to move toward this clean economy, which we know we need to do, then where are we going to get this stuff? Well, the good news is, again, because of the IRA, it's happening here. These stories that I've been telling you about. Today we have more than 40 solar panel manufacturing plants in America, like that one in Dalton, Georgia. We have 50 battery factories coming out of, I might have those numbers reversed actually. It's about 50 solar panel factories and about 40 battery factories that are coming out of the ground now, like that one at Panasonic. We have innovation like we haven't seen in a long time in this country at places like Imperial Valley, where we're getting lithium out of dirty old brine that comes out of the ground. So this is why I call this a revolution. This is why I call this an American economic revolution. And again, it's all because we decided to do something about climate change. Now, what does this have to do with climate? We're talking about jobs, manufacturing, and so forth. What's that got to do with this big hurricane I showed you a picture of, or the flooding at my guy Zach's house in Asheville? Well, these factories are essentially building the tools that we need to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels to reduce our carbon emissions. If the IRA pays off like economists and others have said it will, we can reduce our carbon emissions through these investments by 40% by 2030. That's not a long way away, but you can see the growth that we're already starting to see in just the first 2 years of this. So at the very least, we're on the right track. And if we reduce those carbon emissions, then hopefully those hurricanes won't be as big, those wildfires won't be as bad. It's too late for a lot of places and a lot of times, but look, we got to move forward. We can't continue to go backward, and finally we're going in the right direction. But there are hurdles to that direction. There are bumps in that road. Already there's been more than 40 attempts to roll back the IRA or reduce it in the U.S. House. Many times, by the way, by some of those members who are benefiting the most, like that Congresswoman from Georgia I mentioned. There are organized disinformation campaigns around clean energy all around the country. And in my home state of North Carolina, not too long ago, they outlawed sea level rise. I don't know if you guys heard about that, but you weren't allowed to put sea level rise in any legislation. There was also a little town not too far from where I grew up, actually, that outlawed solar panels in the town. You know why? Because they were afraid it was going to suck all the sun out of the sky, and they weren't going to have enough sun for the crops. I'm not making it up. It's true. But there are also some other very comprehensive campaigns to keep wind turbines off our coasts and to keep solar farms out of our fields. And no, look, we got to do this the right way, but we also need to do something to combat climate change and move to a cleaner economy if we want to avoid the worst of climate change. So, again, there's been 40 attempts to roll this back already in Congress. They ain't going away. We all know what's happening on the in the elections. I run a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so I'm not going to talk about electoral politics, but we all know what's being said on the campaign trail these days. And then we got to make this happen. This is a big project. Compared to other major things this country has done, this is probably bigger. We're talking about an investment that's bigger than what Kennedy invested in the moonshot. It's bigger than what Eisenhower invested in the interstate highway system. It's almost as big as FDR's New Deal in terms of federal investments here. And we got to get it right. We got to do it, and we got to make sure we got the workers to do this. We got to make sure we're doing it with equity, with diversity in mind. We got to do it with environmental justice in mind. And we got to do it pretty quick. So, what does this mean to you? Well, I hope it means a better future if we do this right. But it also means that we all have a responsibility, I think, to make this story known. You don't have to be an old journalism hacker or something or you don't have to write a book to do this. You need to talk to your neighbors. You need to talk to your friends. You need to tell them, you know what, this thing is actually working. And here's some stories that you ought to know about it. And you can learn more about that. You can find that all those cool maps and so forth at my organization's site, e2.org/announcements. You can search for what the projects are in your favorite county in the country. You can certainly learn more in the book, and if you want to get involved with E2 and our chapter here in San Diego, if you're a business person who cares about the environment, go to e2.org. And I think I've probably exhausted my time much more than I had, so I'm going to turn it back over to you guys. Do I call up Jamie, or do you call up Jamie?
Well, awesome. I mean, always great to follow behind Bob Keefe. He definitely sets the bar really, really high. A little bit on my background. So I spend most of my time advising on go-to-market strategy, whether that's through NGOs, startups, really trying to help bring a lot of these policies to life in a way that can actually start to serve homeowners and users for enabling these policies. Really, I want to kind of bring down to the ground level a lot of the aspects of what Bob was talking about here. So what is this really looking like at the ground level? And it's really exciting right now, particularly if we look at the construction industry. Really interesting side note here. The construction industry historically has been the second slowest adopter of technology and innovation. The only industry that we beat is hunting and fishing. Meanwhile now, clean tech innovation and technology is the fastest growing sector in the clean energy transition. And so we have a lot to look forward to moving forward here. My original start in the clean energy transition, though, was working through a startup and actually working with homeowners about how can they modify their homes and actually participate and be a part of this. It's certainly awesome when we get a chance to talk about these new billion-dollar factories, but also let's talk about what we can do in our homes and our lives to be able to align and adapt around this. And kind of moving into that, how familiar do people here feel with the IRA? Do you feel like you're more like the guy on the left or the girl on the right? Anybody here feel like they're an expert in it? All right, perfect. You're completely forgiven. If not, it is a very dense document, and it is definitely very confusing. My goal by the end of me talking is that I want you to be able to understand how to use the IRA and all of the loopholes so that you can maximize the value that's there. This is a game changer in the way that we've done rebates in the past. They've done a lot of different innovative things to be able to allow for you to look at the performance of your home holistically. Versus in the past, a lot of the energy policies have been focused on silver bullets, individual technologies. This is the first time that we're really starting to see that marry together. And so the goal is to really give you a strategy for how to implement that. What I want to do is set a little bit of context before we talk about why you might even want to take advantage of the IRA. The first thing to kind of get a pulse on, as Bob alluded to, the federal government is spending a lot of money to get this accomplished here. We're looking at 3 bills, often referred to as Uncle Bill, Uncle Chip, and Uncle IRA. But combined, those 3 bills have injected $1.2 trillion into the economy. I'm gonna say that number one more time. That's $1.2 trillion. That is huge in the fact that it's the largest investment by any country ever, and it completely changes the US energy policy, which also should, to an extent, provide some resilience regardless of who's in the administration. I've had a lot of conversations about this, and there's some aspects there that regardless of whichever direction we go policy-wise, we're on a path right now to where $1.2 trillion is not getting unspent. So there is a lot to have optimism about. Specifically the IRA, though, over the next 10 years, we're looking at about $860 billion. What exactly does that mean for you, though? Essentially, the IRA gives everybody in this room an electric bank account. You have a bank account every single year that resets. That bank account can be used for you to electrify your home faster and for cheaper. Really key part to understand about that is the fact that it does reset every year, which means that if you want to maximize the value of this legislation, you want to have a multi-year plan. A little bit of context about why the federal government is spending this money, and Bob highlighted that very well with the photos of the hurricanes that are taking place. But the worst of the climate crisis, in order for us to hit IPCC targets, we need to make changes and move towards zero emissions and basically electrify everything. This kind of gives a context for how the federal government is thinking about this and when they're investing these dollars. We need individuals to basically adopt this technology 300% faster than they would otherwise. When we look at things like heat pump technology or home upgrades, a lot of times we wait till it breaks, then we look to make the upgrade. That blue dotted line that you see there is business as usual. The yellow curve line is where we need to be at in adoption in order for us to hit our climate targets. So when we think about the amount of money that's being put into the market, it is to get us to act early. That's a very important part to understand about this, because the way that it's structured, the way that the bill is structured, there are time limits, there are funding limits. So basically, you want to be towards the front of the line. You don't necessarily want to wait. On the back end of that, our government tends to operate with carrots and sticks. So carrots certainly being the rebates and the incentives that are available. But on the back end, they're aggressively pushing for increasing regulations. And that could be everything from the appliances that we're using, improving the efficiencies on them. One of the big ones right now with heat pumps are upgrading the refrigerants that we're using. Recent update to this, there have been pushes for housing codes, the energy codes inside of housing, to be elevated as well. They've hit some snags as far as making that come to a reality, but they are also looking at other avenues to be able to anchor in that funding, a lot of which being now through FEMA funding. Anything that gets federal funding essentially has to be at these new higher efficiency standards. I want us to have a context of this. I've been in the industry now since 2010, and I originally started by working with homeowners throughout Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Northern California, Southern California. I did that for about 10 years, working one-on-one with homeowners to upgrade their properties. The general rule of thumb for a lot of homeowners is, I don't want to be the first one, I want to wait, and then it's going to get cheaper. The reality is, and a lot of people are looking at heat pump prices just in and of itself, and they're saying, it's pricey, I want to put this off. What they're not realizing is that this is probably the cheapest that it's going to be. Because of the changing regulations in the back end, equipment's getting more expensive. We have a massive labor shortage of about 1.1 million workers, so even finding somebody qualified enough to be able to do the job is getting to be more challenging. And these incentives are only mandated for a certain portion of time. So it does not behoove most of us to put this off. It would be more beneficial for a lot of us financially, and also the impact and performance of our properties if we were more proactive at this. in a nutshell, the IRA is really doing three things. We're accelerating electrification and decarbonization. Basically, we talked about the fact that in order for us to hit those IPCC targets, we need a 300% jump in the adoption gap. You want to understand the fact that there are time limits to this, so use it or lose it, and there's funding limits, so don't be last. It's projected that most homeowners will use the IRA for a one-off upgrade, which makes sense. You can actually see what the upgrades are that are available for incentives on the right. And so they project out that basically the average homeowner will get 1 to 2 incentives for anywhere between $2,000 to $6,000. What I want to point out here, that is the least effective way for you to use the IRA with one-off upgrades. If you actually focus on decarbonization, which is actually the efficiency, longevity, and health of your property, and you actually stack incentives, you can actually push that funding to $15,000 to $25,000. And there are certain caveats built in that will allow for you to exceed certain funding limits. Anybody interested in finding out how to do that? All right, so I'm going to give you guys the cheat sheet for how to maximize the IRA. Here's a map. So this kind of gives you an idea of what the possibilities are. Where can you electrify, right? And so this can be everything from your appliances to solar to your heating and cooling. We also have rebates that are available for things like your clothes dryer, heat pump water heaters. Basically, all the key components and energy users inside your property are going to be eligible. Here's your homeowner cheat sheet. This is the kind of main things to take away from here. So you have both federal and state incentives. As a matter of fact, this is great timing for us to be talking about this because California just launched the HERA rebates, the state rebates. This is a cash point of sale rebate for anything that you purchase that's eligible. So right off the top. There's multiple pathways for you to qualify, and you can also mix and match incentives. Here's a key part that often goes overlooked, and that is that your incentives are also stackable. That did not used to be the case. If you did one thing, you could only do that. You could not claim it elsewhere. They're allowing for you to mix and combine. One of the caveats that goes overlooked is the innovation of new hybrid technologies. Hybrid technologies could be anything like, as an example, for Luna, our company, we sell a solar hybrid ductless system. So operates both off of solar and is also a heat pump. We're seeing a new category of appliances coming out that are referred to as energy storage appliances. So it's an induction stove that has a built-in 8 kilowatt battery so that you can also run off the battery with your appliances. There's other examples of, in the very near future, we'll likely start to see heat pumps that have embedded batteries in them as well. Keep an eye out for technologies that have that hybrid feature to them because you can use both incentives. In the example of a solar hybrid system, solar hybrid heat pump, we can claim both the solar incentive as well as the heat pump incentive. They're allowing for that. Your key incentivized upgrades, so there's a couple that you really want to spotlight that will give you opportunities for increasing that funding. Solar and batteries will help you to unlock additional incentives. Smart breaker panel, you're actually eligible to exceed the funding limit if combined with solar. That is huge if you're at a property where you need to have a service change. So if the incoming service isn't rated high enough and you have to make that extra purchase, which in a lot of cases could be anywhere from $4,000 to $8,000 or more, this is a great opportunity to take advantage of that because you get 30% of that back. So instead of a flat rate, it's 30% for the entire project. Heat pump and heat pump water heater, you cannot do in the same year or you'll exceed the funding limit. And then weatherization and electrical upgrades are repeatable every single year. I'm going to repeat that one again. Weatherization and wiring upgrades are repeatable every single year. So what that means is you can actually start to use this for areas of your house that you may want to upgrade wiring, lighting, but you can do it sectionally throughout the house. Or a lot of times we'll run into homeowners that maybe have older windows, and it's like they've gone out and priced the windows, and those are really pricey. So you can actually do sections of your home or parts of your home and take advantage of that resetting incentive every single year. Here would be an example of how to set up the incentives to be able to maximize the return that you get. The order matters, and you only get one shot at it. If you do your heat pump and your solar panels in year one, or if you do your heat pump and solar panels in year one, but you put off the breaker panel till year two, you're not going to be able to combine that for the 30%, and you're going to get stuck at the $900 cap. This is also a really huge opportunity. We put specifically on here smart breaker panel over a regular breaker panel because it's your opportunity to be able to get 30% back. And so with that, it makes a lot more sense to invest in an energy management system that allows for you to see how your home is using energy and being able to manage that with storage and with solar. This basically breaks down for you though, year one, heat pump, solar panels, smart breaker panel, especially if you have a service change, weatherization, insulation, you'll typically want to start with one section of the house, whether that's an attic or in your crawl space. And then like year two, you could look at something like heat pump, water heater, appliances, particularly like induction stove with an embedded battery. And then I would break out weatherization as a year-over-year upgrade. And that could, again, be windows, that could be insulation, that could be your doors. There's a lot of opportunities for you to be able to take advantage of that. And then things like EV charger, home battery storage, that can be done at any point. I want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to take a photo of this. This is probably the most helpful thing that I can give you guys as far as the cheat sheet. Cool. So 5 key takeaways here. $1.2 trillion, most ever spent by any country for clean energy for the purpose of accelerating electrification and decarbonization. Really make sure that we spotlight and focus on hybrid technologies and decarbonization. Particularly, the only reason that people don't usually do hybrid technologies is because they're newer and they're more expensive. This is one of those strange times where you can actually get those technologies installed for significantly less because you are able to take advantage of multiple incentives on one project. Factors that will affect your IRA incentives when you choose to upgrade. Again, every year that's going to reset on you. What technologies you use to upgrade with, and which order you upgrade in. The only way, again, for you to maximize those incentives is with a multi-year plan. Now, that gave you a breakdown of the IRA, but the next natural question usually after that is, what about my house, right? So how do we figure out the best way for you to be able to use these dollars for yourself and your situation? Anybody here have a background in building science? Just me? All right, I'm gonna give you the crash course here in building science. This is high level. This is something that you can use for any contractor, any way to be able to determine what order of operations that you should prioritize when you're making home upgrades. So basics of building science and performance. First thing we want to know, where are your expenses going, right? A lot of times when we talk to homeowners, they think about my insurance, my utility bills. We tend not to think about the whole picture. And so one of the things that our company focuses on is called TCO, total cost of ownership. Because at the end of the day, you have an asset, you're responsible for managing that. We want to lower the cost of managing that asset. When we break down where expenses are most common in homes, typically only about 1/3 of our expenses go to our energy usage. By far, the biggest portions go to replacement costs, maintenance costs, and any damage to the house. This gives you a really great map now to figure out where are the best investments for me to make in my home. Anything that extends the lifespan of any of the major equipment in your house is going to give you the best return because those are generally going to be your biggest expenses. We want to get an idea of replacement schedules. Where are you at in that cycle of replacement? Depending upon the area and depending upon like the roofing type, for instance, in the Northwest, roofs there, a 30-year composition roof actually only lasts about 18 to 20 years, and the average homeowner is going to spend about $30,000. Down here, it can certainly differ, especially with us having tile roofs, but we want to have an idea of where we're at in the maintenance cycles of our home and where those expenses may be coming up. Because if you can use the IRA to offset expenses that you already have as a homeowner, that puts you in a win-win situation. HVAC replacement, generally about 10 to 15 years. you're usually looking at about a $20,000 to $25,000 investment. Attic insulation, 5-10 years. That should be done repeatedly updating that. Your water heater, 10-15 years. Breaker panel, 20-25 years. So if you know that you're coming up on any of those, write that down. Put that as a spotlight, because those are things that you can take advantage of with the IRA. When we're looking at building performance, it's really just a 5-step strategy model. The first and most important is airflow. Airflow is the most important part of every structure. It tells you 3 things. It tells you how long that structure is going to last, how healthy that structure is going to be, and how long everything inside that structure is going to last. Proper ventilation can extend a roof lifespan up to 50%, while also improving the air quality in your home, lowering the temperatures, cutting down on utility bills, extending the life of your heating and cooling equipment. Airflow should always be the first focus in your household. And here on the right, you can see examples of actual roofs from actual audits where I had the pleasure of climbing in these attic spaces and taking these photos, and can give you an idea of some of the things that can go wrong when we don't have proper ventilation. Another area to look at when we are looking at ventilating underneath your home is the most important area for the whole health of your house. Most people don't realize this, but up to 40% of the air that you breathe in your home actually comes from your crawl space, from the cold air exchange between those areas. So having adequate ventilation in a crawl space, really important to focus on. The next area, so airflow is number 1. Number 2 is gonna be your envelope. Your envelope is everything that's responsible for keeping energy in or out of the structure. So these are things like your windows, your doors, most especially your insulation, particularly in the attic and in the crawl space. That is where we have the greatest energy exchange. Proper insulation can basically help balance the temperatures in the home, improve comfort, lower your utility bills, but also really importantly, extend the life of your heating and cooling system. If you only have to make that purchase once, that's the most ideal situation for most of us. I'm sure not too many people here get that excited about going to go spend another $20,000, $25,000 on a heat pump. No. So let's make sure that's a one-time purchase. Your next is gonna be your heating and cooling systems. I really wanna double down on this actually too, because heat pumps are not that easy to install. There's a lot of steps that are required with this. And there's we're in the middle of kind of a threading the needle moment here, where energy rates, does anybody here feel like they pay too much for energy? A couple of us. The unfortunate news is we're only gonna see higher energy rates. It's not going to go down. The energy economy has completely shifted with AI and data centers. Basically now we are in a situation where the federal government, every major corporation is competing on AI. They consider it zero sum. You have to have the best. Well, in order to have the best, it's directly tied to our energy. And so now we're in a brand new economy here where energy actually equals power and opportunity for really the largest stakeholders, our federal government, our major corporations. And so what that means for us as consumers is that the competition for a watt of power or a therm or BTU of energy tomorrow is going to be more fierce than it is today. And until that strategy map changes, it's going to continue in perpetuity. That's helpful to understand because when we're looking at heat pumps, just putting in brand new technology doesn't automatically make it cheaper today. In some cases, especially with where our electric rates are in California, putting in a heat pump today might actually cost you a little bit more. Ways that you can get around that are by making sure that the home is properly weatherized so that you are using less overall energy and making sure that it's installed properly. What I want to add to that, because I did start this off with let's move sooner, not wait, because there are a certain number of people who are now saying, well, wait, electric rates are higher. I don't want to pay more per month to install a heat pump and switch my usage over to electricity. Here's the thing. It's a lose-lose either way on that aspect of it as far as the energy rates because all energy is going up, whether it's electric, whether it's fossil fuels. As a matter of fact, there are several studies out that show that as more of us switch over to electric and there's fewer people left on the gas system paying for fossil fuel prices, in some states they're projecting as high as a 900% increase in rates for gas in the next 10 years. So this is definitely a moment for us to all kind of look and evaluate our own situation, see where we're at, so that we can best position ourselves to make sure that your home's secure and also financially sound. On that number 3, heating and cooling systems. So really helpful to note, heating and cooling is generally about 40 to 60% of your utility bill. Cooling, obviously, is going to be the predominant load down here in Southern California. But heat pumps do offer some of the most efficient forms of cooling that is available. Water heating as well. Generally, water heating is about the second highest energy user, followed by your lighting. But heat pump water heaters are 2 to 3 times more efficient than traditional water heaters. Number 4, this is going to be relatively straightforward, but it's basically going to be your smart home controls, your sensors, things that allow for you to see what's going on with the energy profile in your house in real time. This could be incredibly important if we're in a hurricane situation and you do have solar and batteries, because it allows for you to actually be able to monitor and see what's going on with your energy usage, being able to conserve that battery. But also, I've seen a lot of homeowners that have used systems like these to be able to, if they get high bills from the utility company, now they actually have their own data. They can come back and say, well, wait a second, something's off here. Or instead of waiting to get a high utility bill because you overused energy on something, you can actually see in real time what's going on, and so you don't get those surprises on the back end. And then number 5, that's going to be energy independence. So this is where we start talking about solar energy systems, home battery storage, electric vehicle charger. This space is going to be really, really exciting moving forward as we start talking about EV vehicles to grid exchange and virtual power plants, and essentially the pathways that are being opened up now for consumers to actually be able to sell their energy back to the grid and actually receive compensation for that. And basically what you would want to do from where we are right now is that you'd want to look at first having an IRA eligibility assessment. So having an idea of where you fall within the bucket of the IRA. There are different income levels. There's federal, there's state. So figuring out exactly what your specific eligibility looks like. And then you would want to have an energy audit done so that you can see what areas of your house will most benefit from some of these upgrades. And then from there, you'll want to personalize your own specific strategy, figuring out, again, year over year, what you want to invest in and what makes the most sense for you. All right. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was an amazing presentation, both of you, and I really love to hear about how the IRA works on the ground, because I'm a professor and I teach on this stuff, but we look at it in a completely different way. When I teach climate change law, which is relatively new for most students, relatively new to our university as well, you look at the steps that have been taken at the federal level in the past, say, 20 years, and you find that every time the government changed, there's a whiplash. So there's, there's lots of things done during one type of president and lots of opposite things done during another time. And it is the EPA which has had to deal with this whiplash, because first they're told you've got to do something about greenhouse gases, and they do. Then they're told, actually, no, you've got to remove everything and find a reason for why it should be the other way. So the EPA administrators have to, crack their heads to justify it in either direction. Then things go to court, these regulations that they do come up with, and they get thrashed here and there depending on which court these regulations are litigated. So that is what I teach my law students, is this whiplash is nearly impossible to deal with. So when the IRA came about, nobody knew what to do with that in terms of sort of a teaching law, because we were all following these massive cases and litigation in the Fifth Circuit and the Eighth Circuit and the Ninth Circuit, looking at how the judges changed over time and how they would try to decide. And then the IRA came. It has nothing to do with which state will get the money, or it's up to you, right? Or do we have to have a regulation for this? And that is a huge, huge difference. It's about incentivizing rather than mandating regulations. So we want to hope that, it continues with the speed that you spoke about, and also at the speed at which our second speaker spoke about, Jamie, and how fast it seems to be going, considering how fast he spoke about it too. It was like, wow, there's a lot going on. Does anybody in the audience have a question for them to start with?
I'm just wondering if you could share with you some of your thoughts on the future of electricity, particularly the price and the price and the cost, because unless that can get considerably lower, most of the things during the energy transition are electric, and we could end up with an electric economy, which probably is good for the environment, but many of the things you're talking about depend on renewable electricity, even the lithium to mine it. So I'm just wondering how people in your industry think about the future of electricity, particularly the cost.
First of all, every utility in the country right now is switching to clean energy. They're switching to solar, their wind. There's still some natural gas being built, but not a lot. Nobody's building coal plants anymore. And the reason for that has something to do with environmental policies, but it has to do with something else that's just as important, if not more important, which is the cost of electricity. Right now, you cannot make electricity any cheaper than you can from solar or wind. It's just the cheapest power available. Once you get that stuff up, it's free. So quite naturally, utilities want to get the cheapest power they can get so they can add something onto it and sell it to you and me. So we're definitely moving toward a clean energy, a clean electricity future, no matter what. Now, the problem is, and Jamie alluded to this, is that we ain't producing enough of it right now. And we've got a long way to go. We need to build a lot more clean energy to meet the demand from things like AI, but also from things like the things that we've been talking about that the world is moving to, electric vehicles and electric houses and so forth. So the other big key part of this, and it's something that Jamie works on a lot, is energy efficiency. We not only need to produce more electricity, but we need to use it more wisely.
But you covered that so thoroughly. I think there's a handful of parts that are important to acknowledge. And the first is when we say cheaper electricity, what are we referring to? Like, the absolute price of energy is going to continue to increase because the demand for energy is increasing. It hasn't been that way for a long while. We've been flatlined. And now, a lot of these utility companies have been caught just unprepared. Recently PGM over in the Northeast Midwest, they saw a 800% increase in their last bidding for energy. Now, as we are talking about these projects and we are talking about the push and the development of clean energy technology, thank God that we have. Even though California we have some of the highest energy rates in the entire country, without the clean energy projects that we have, those rates would all be higher. And so that was actually kind of one of the parts that I was alluding to is in talking about taking advantage of the IRA. We all just need to accept that tomorrow we're going to pay more for energy than we're paying today, right? Now it's just about how do we navigate that balance as effectively as possible. And to your point, it is not lost on anybody that the higher the electric rates are, the more resistance that there's going to be to installing heat pumps and to switching to EV vehicles. And so we're starting to see policies that are coming out that are helping with that. So one of the I don't know, I forget off the top of my head right now which state implemented this already, but they're based, I think it was in Massachusetts actually. But they're actually offering out discounted rates for homeowners that have switched over to heat pumps, right? So they are looking at that. They recognize that that's part of the issue, but also ultimately, I want to just be point blank about it. Like, your energy is going to cost you more. You're going to spend a higher percentage of your income in the future on energy than we are today, and that is because AI, because of things like blockchain technology and crypto, where people are now making large sums of money off of pulling energy from the grid. We are, for the first time in, I think, a decade plus, seeing the growth of energy demand. And we just don't have an immediate plan. California alone, I think, is projected for something like a 5 megawatt shortfall in energy in the next 10 years.
So just to add, I'm so glad that he did say that the price of energy is going up, because, I mean, we have to accept, it's an honest assessment of what is going to happen because of so much demand that's going to happen. But that also brings me, and I know there's a question in the back, to the question of this justice, right? Energy justice and Justice 40 and the attempts to kind of help people through it. And you did allude to the fact that there are coming policies, or there are already policies, because otherwise the whole middle class will just sort of get smaller unless we do something about it. Are you seeing that kind of thing on the ground helping? I mean, you talked about the uptake of the incentives right now, yes. Are you seeing like the middle class taking it up and also getting help with expenses? Because it is already expensive.
Yeah, so I actually had a recent conversation not too long ago with the senior policy director at ACEEE, and we talked about this very point. And this actually goes overlooked. So low income is actually at the center of the clean energy transition, which was a little counterintuitive when I first heard it until they actually broke it out. And basically the situation is that if we do not put low income or median income households at the front of the energy transition, they're going to end up trapped on a fossil fuel system, and it's going to be too expensive for them to be able to transfer later on. You probably have better insight on the exact numbers as far as how much we're projected to save with the clean energy transition, but I know it's in the billions of dollars.
Yeah.
But essentially, we go from a net savings to a net loss if we leave low-income households and median-income households behind. And we do things the way that we've done it in the past, which, and I've even made this comment because my first startup was built on bringing new technologies to market. So we did go to, you generally start at the high end, like the Tesla Roadster, and then you get it down to where it's more economical. But we're in a situation where it's recognized at the policy level that we need to actually invert that curve in order for us to deliver on this.
Yeah, can you put the slide deck back for the second presentation? There was one that a few of us had questions on, the cost of home ownership. For a lot of us, there's an item on here that's missing that's more than all this combined, and that's property taxes. Is there a reason that wasn't listed on there?
I thought you were going to say kids.
I can't help you with the taxes or the kids. Okay, I get what you're saying. Are you talking about if you do these upgrades and increase the equity value of the house, potentially having to pay
No,
more?
it's just 7 years ago when they passed the SALT, the Inflation Reduction Act, whatever the tax thing was, we're limited to the amount of state and local taxes we can deduct. So regardless of how much you pay, you're limited to 10,000.
I get what you're saying.
Expense.
There you go.
Okay, so your state rebates and your federal rebates are not going to be beholden to that tax portion. And then to add another piece on top of that, I don't know specifically for here in Del Mar, but I do know that several states have enacted policy. Actually, wait, no, I think they did do this in California as well, where if you are to add in solar or other clean energy technologies that actually increase the equity value of your house, you don't have to pay additional taxes on that.
And the value of the house is supposed to go up.
Yes.
But then you would pay more property tax.
No, that's what I was saying. So they've pulled that off.
Okay.
I had the
I
next
agree
question.
that property tax is a really huge chunk, unfortunately.
Did you have the next question?
Hi, I just wanted to thank you both for what you've taught us. I didn't know what the IRA actually meant and the benefits we have. So it is an incentive rather than a mandate, which is great, except most of us didn't understand it and haven't done it. So, and Bob, both of you said, I do believe that sustainables will take over the whole grid once it's profitable.
Just
Thank
following up also on that comment, how do individuals access the incentives, the tax credits? Do they have to go through a company like yours?
Yeah.
Like, you know,
it's-
if I wanted to get.
Well, wait,
incentive.
so it depends on what we're talking about. If you're talking about the federal incentives, no, you just have to do it. You claim it on your taxes,
Put it on your
right?
taxes.
You'll have your invoice there, enter in the dollar amounts that you put. If it's on TurboTax, makes it super easy. If you spend this amount on solar, put it in, it'll pull the 30% back out for you. Now, you will want to have a little bit deeper insight on that if you are doing things like hybrid technologies, or if you're doing some of the stacking that allows for you to exceed some of those funding limits, then you might want to have a little bit, more detailed of a look on it. When we're talking about the state rebates, that has not been entirely defined yet. For some states, you do have to be a part of preferred contractor networks or things like that in order to be able to access those. But also, you should be able to ask those questions to your contractor and verify that they actually have access to be able to sign off on those.
Okay, thank you. I think we had another question here.
You have one on that side, then I'll get you next.
Oh, we're over here. Thanks for the presentations. Speaking to the equity component to it, how many of the incentives for individuals in the IRA can be applied to people who aren't fortunate enough to own a home, live in multifamily or renting?
That's actually one of the parts where this is a very progressive bill. There are a lot of incentives that are set aside for renters. For appliance upgrades is one of the biggest ones. But there's also this is a really exciting conversation because there's so much innovation that's also taking place. There's a company that I consult or advise for. It's called BioLite, and they do off-grid solutions. They have taken and providing off-grid solutions in Africa and for campers. They've just developed a brand new portable battery that you can plug into the wall, self-install. This is something where everybody can take advantage of the 30% credit, even if you are renting. And now you've got something that can now power your fridge. It does get a little bit tricky with some of the things that if you're modifying the structure, you're gonna be pretty limited, but you do have access to virtually all the appliance upgrades. So even things like, let's say you wanna do an induction stove, which I'm actually probably gonna take advantage of this because I have a gas stove and I don't wanna use it. But your induction, you can buy a tabletop. That's also gonna be eligible for you for upgrades. There's cool companies, if you are in a situation where, maybe there isn't a heat pump or anything like that, there's new companies developing efficient technologies. Gradient is a great example of this, where you can actually get a window heat pump. And again, these things are gonna be eligible for those incentives. So just because you are a renter or just because you are in multifamily, you are also a part of this, and there are dollars that are available to you. And those dollars do also reset every single year as well. So you can take advantage of that.
And of course, one of the biggest incentives in the IRA is the $7,500 tax credit for a new EV, or $4,000 for a used electric vehicle.
Yeah, that is new, that the $4,000 for used.
Yeah, well, that
Because
was
we
all
had
part,
this-
that was all
yeah, so
part of the
that's-
law.
that
Yeah,
helps.
but, and you can, you're eligible for credits for the charger that goes with that.
And to your point too, I want to add this on the equity side. Another important aspect as far as why it's important for lower income households to be pushed to the front of the line. We don't think about this, but they also get subsidized energy. And so the other aspect of this is that we all pay more if we leave lower income households or median income households behind.
You're talking about energy efficient vehicles and electrification of vehicles. How about hydrogen cell vehicles? Could you talk a little bit about that?
You ever seen one of those? I haven't. I've seen one, I think. I've seen one.
There is one.
Yeah,
In this
there's a
area.
couple out there, but the problem, I think, is figuring out how to fill them up.
Yeah.
I think, there was a lot of early technologies around getting gas out of cars. It's pretty clear that electrifying cars is what's sticking. Now, hydrogen has been called the Swiss Army knife of energy. You can do a lot of things with hydrogen. And there's going to be a lot of good uses for hydrogen. One of the biggest uses, I think, is in heavy industry, because hydrogen can pack a lot of punch. So think about steel mills that are going to run off of hydrogen, concrete plants. They're looking at ways to get fossil fuels out of airplanes. Hydrogen may be part of that mix. Hydrogen might be for locomotives. For passenger vehicles, I don't see it.
And
You don't need all the batteries, all the lithium.
That's true.
Right, right.
That is true.
But the IRA has a lot of incentives for hydrogen
Yeah.
production as well, and they've just provided, I think DOE has provided like money for regional hydrogen
right.
hubs in the country. I think there are 7 of them spread out. One of them is the California Hydrogen Hub, and there's one in the Pacific Northwest.
Yep.
And then there are 5 more in the Midwest and on the East Coast. And the difference between the west side and the others are that these 2 on the west are focusing on what's called green hydrogen, which is hydrogen that is produced with renewable electricity and electrolysis. And the other ones have a mix of green and gray and blue, which is not quite as green as our side.
Right.
So the IRA does have
That's right.
incentives for those.
Yeah, I would say
Absolutely.
it's one of the parts of the IRA that I feel like goes most overlooked, and that is the amount of investment that was made in innovation to bring
Absolutely.
new ideas to market. I agree with Bob's sentiment on hydrogen. I think we're probably first going to see that in heavy industry. You know, there's also a lot of talk on using hydrogen for energy storage as well, being able to, you know, use solar during the day, store that through hydrogen, use it at night. There's a really interesting project that's going on in Hawaii where they're actually looking at potentially developing the first fully vertically integrated hydrogen airport. I've actually had an opportunity to see the plans for that, and like it is really cool. Like they're talking about producing hydrogen on site, doing enough to be able to send that energy to refill planes, but also making it a part of the infrastructure and local economy, being able to refill public transportation, being able to use it in agriculture. So, you know, this is again why I'm genuinely a massive fan of Bob and the clean energy economy, because this is a very, and I've heard you say this, and I've adopted it myself, this is a very exciting story for us to be telling right now, because we are changing fundamentally the ground infrastructure of how we operate in this country, and it's going to create so many new opportunities for us.
Question over here. From a big picture point of view, I'm interested in what you see as the failure points, if there are some, in us transitioning from our status quo to a clean energy economy that meets people's energy need in a clean way. In particular, it's the ability to expand the grid to keep pace with the demand, the ability to secure the precious metals needed to do a lot of the technologies and the nasty effects of dealing with those afterwards, the ability to bring equity along, so we're not just doing it for the people that can afford it. And I'm hoping you can give me some hope that as the curve of demand is ramping up through the demand for cryptocurrencies and, as you said, AI and all of this, and I think we're selling and producing more oil now than we ever have, and all of this is racing together. I'm looking for some hope that the clean energy economy is actually going to be able to deal with that whole panoply of issues and bring us forward to a successful point.
Well, I think you just hit on a lot of the big hurdles, right? I mean, really, I mean, the grid is a huge hurdle. We're producing in this state more clean energy than we can possibly use almost every day now. And we ought to be shipping that to places that don't have it, but the grid doesn't exist yet for that. Or the grid exists, it's just so old that it doesn't work. So we need to invest in the grid. The good news is that's starting to move faster. And we're starting to see more projects get moving on that, but I don't know if it's going to be fast enough. In terms of mining, that's a huge issue. I talked about the lithium mine down in, it's not a mine, the extraction that they're doing in Imperial Valley. I also in the book went to a place in Kings Mountain, North Carolina, where there was a lithium mine for decades until probably the 80s, and they shut it down. Well, after the IRA, they're reopening that mine, and they're going to get lithium out of this same mine, which, you know, as an environmentalist, I'm not a big fan of mining, but if you're going to do it, you might as well do it in a place that's already got a big hole in the ground. So there are ways to do that, but the situation is, if we don't do it, this is going to happen, quite honestly, with forced labor in China, in the Congo, et cetera. If we do it here, not only do we help drive this economic revolution and do something about the health of our planet, but we can do it with environmental regulations that we create here that are the best in the world. We can do it with fair wages, and we can do it with equity. So it's really important that we do this stuff here. But you're exactly right. There's a lot of hurdles. You mentioned a few of them. One I worry about is workforce development. We're going to need, one of the biggest problems when I talk to our members who are in the clean energy business, they say, hey, Bob, man, it's great you passed all these cool policies, but I can't hire enough people today to get these wind turbines up or to get these solar panels installed or whatever. We need more workers. And we need to start educating kids that of these possibilities, when they're in high school or earlier. When I was in Dalton for that visiting Q cells, I asked the HR manager there, she's hiring 4,000 people. I said, how do you get them? And she said, well, we start in middle school. We start holding science camps here. We invite the local kids here just to teach them what a solar panel is and show them that there's a job in their backyard that they don't have to work in the carpet mill. And we foster them along and hope someday they'll be our employees. But it's going to be a problem.
Can I follow up with that? Your points that you made, right, is all these challenges. And one of the other challenges is that we had this whiplash between the different administrations in the federal government. And so do you think that the IRA is more permanent than the whiplash that we've been seeing? Because one of the reasons why China could pass and go on is because we kept going back and forth. It takes so long, we just say yes, then we say no. China didn't say that. They just had this continuous policy. So of course, anybody who has that is going to be ahead. So I wonder whether the IRA will help to overcome
So
that.
if you talk to the architects of the IRA, the folks that actually wrote the law, they will tell you that we did this with durability in mind. We know we're not going to be in office forever, and rightly so, right? So if you look at some of these tax incentives, for instance, for 30% for solar or wind or electric vehicles, those were policies that have been around, but they'd expire every single year. Now imagine if you're a wind farm developer and you're trying to plot out your 5 years of business, but you don't know what the heck you're going to have to deal with every single year. Well, now those policies have been extended for 10 years across the board. So it finally gives businesses the market visibility that they can actually make some decisions to get stuff done. So in that way, yes, it is going to be more durable. Right. That said, we've had a different president in this country one time that rolled back more than 100 fundamental environmental policies in the course of 4 years. So things can also be reversed. But because this is legislation, it makes it a heck of a lot harder, as you know, as a law professor. It's a law.
Well, you said there were 40 attempts to try to overturn it, or
That's right.
Yeah, I wasn't aware.
Most of them have failed.
Yeah, so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the other part too is that we're also starting to see the actual dollars come in from these investments as well, and that's
Absolutely.
really a game changer, right? We recently had 16 Republican senators, write to the House
right.
Speaker to say, "Hey, no, we don't want to lose these jobs. We've already made these investments." So there's a certain amount of, again, you're not going to unspend $1.2 trillion, even if the administration were to change. And I've had several conversations on this. My personal feeling on it is that even if they were to roll in aggressively and say we're taking back any dollars that are unspent, I couldn't imagine them staying on that track for any more than 12 to 24 months, because this is now a geopolitical competition. And the reality is, not to get too deep into geopolitics, but when you look at a competition with China and where their economy currently is, they don't have the demographics for that country are not in a position for them to be able to grow their economy through consumption. They've already maxed out their economy through infrastructure. They can't do any more debt financing. The opening that they have to be able to remain a competitive economy is by exporting clean energy technology to the rest of the world. So it really wouldn't take more than 12, 24 months for the administration to likely change course, because they would realize very quickly a step back by the US is 2 steps forward for China and other competitors. At this point, we're also in front of Europe. Europe waited to see what we were doing with the IRA. Once we put these 3 bills in place, they made their own version of the IRA as well. So now you got to think about it from the standpoint of not only China, but also like, do you want to take the back seat to Europe? And I don't imagine them staying locked into that. To your question on the challenges and where we're seeing holes, there's challenges everywhere, because the reality is we're doing this all at once everywhere. There's a lot of people who look at it and say like, I don't want to upgrade my heat pump now to an electric because my utility grid is still served by fossil fuels. The fact is that this is not going to happen sequentially. And a lot of these things are all happening independently, right? Like, no, still make the upgrade. Why? Because you want to talk about life cycle carbon emissions for the asset that you're purchasing, right? And so if you make something that has a 15-year lifespan on it, and then in year 5, your utility company switches over to green sources, well, over the life cycle of that investment, you're going to use more carbon. When I'm having these discussions with clean energy leaders, really the distinction that we want to have, or the distinction that I always put forward first is this a persistent issue or is this a transient problem? A lot of the things that we're experiencing are transient problems, even with things like lithium. They're discovering new deposits every single month. They're finding ways, hey, we can actually pull this from the ocean. It is literally sitting on the ocean floor. We can just go mine it from there. So, I think that there's a lot of exaggeration in where the shortfalls are. One of the areas that I would say is going to be a persistent problem, though, is the fact that we're short 1.1 million workers. We just don't have the bodies to facilitate that. We don't have enough immigration coming in to facilitate that. There's optimism that we're going to see this shift from white-collar workers to what we're calling green-collar workers. But there's probably going to be quite a bit of challenge to that, because we've spent a lot of time saying, get educated, get degrees, work your way up. Wait, now go out in the field and install heat pumps. Like, there's some challenge in making that a reality. That said, though, to the point of equity, ingenuity, innovation, when we are talking about workforce development, they're changing all of that as well. So we're seeing AR and VR being introduced into classrooms, where they're now putting headsets on junior high school students in disadvantaged communities. And they're actually teaching them the hard skills that they need to where they'll have an opportunity to be able to leave out of disadvantaged communities with a job that could pay them $60, $80, $100+ a year. That's really, really encouraging to see. One of the other areas that we know that we have a block is definitely on the permitting side and just getting things connected to the grid. PJM, the silver lining to that is that the reason PJM's prices went up 800% is because 2% of their energy profile of their portfolio was solar and wind. We now know what happens if you don't get enough clean energy assets on the grid, right? And so now that's basically just become like the warning child for everyone. And we're seeing the advantage of AI and having these corporations come in who are writing $100 billion checks is that we now have a very powerful partner in the clean energy transition. Microsoft recently just purchased exclusively the power from 3 Mile Island in New York.
The nuclear power.
The first company to ever purchase nuclear energy exclusively.
They restarted it.
One of the reactors, right? So I would say at the top of that list is definitely going to be workforce development. A lot of these other issues about where we're going to get procurement, and permitting, processing, like that will all get worked out.
The workforce development, though, even if we had more immigration, it's the same problem. You still need to do the educational.
That's right.
Nobody knows this stuff, whether you're from here or from there or anywhere else, right? So there's an educational process that has to take place.
This nice lady's
Sorry,
been
yes.
waiting for a question for a while.
Thank you very much. Very informative talks. What has the IRA done for agriculture?
Thank you.
How is that getting
Good
translated?
question. There are some incentives in the IRA for renewables on farms. Actually, one of the cool things that my organization actually worked a little hard on is, if you drive up the Central Valley, you see those big open irrigation ditches, and everybody that drives by says, "Why the hell are those open? And isn't that just evaporating?" Well, there's a pilot program in the IRA right now that would put solar panels over the tops of those. And then those solar panels will be hooked up to the pumps that move that water around. Pretty smart idea. So that is an example. Some of this is now being caught up in the convoluted Farm Bill process, which is now a year and a half or so overdue. There are some folks that are trying to, among those 40 attempts to roll back parts of the IRA, they come in appropriations bills like the Farm Bill, where they're trying to strip some of that stuff out of there. So I don't know exactly where it's going to end up, but there are some provisions in there for agriculture, yeah.
So my question, so first, thank you for this really inspirational panel discussion and the
Thanks for listening.
presentations. It's fantastic. I'm hoping this is recorded so that we can listen again. It is. Great. Del Mar is putting its utility wires underground, and the costs for doing this have just ballooned. We're trying to figure out why. Part of it is the electric company being opaque. So hopefully we'll be able to lift that lid and understand why they're increasing their costs. But that aside, is there room in the IRA for what we might call green transmission? That so basically what we're doing with undergrounding is we're building an entirely new underground utility transmission network. Yeah. And then we're taking out the old one up above. So if we could calculate how much less electricity is lost in this new underground compared to the above, would that be a basis for applying for IRA dollars?
Oof.
I don't know.
Now that's a left field question.
Really interesting
No,
question.
specifically have an impact with IRA. There's a pathway a door that you definitely just opened there that I won't go down too much because it's a big conversation, and that is the opaquity of utility companies, which is the big challenge right now. They need to change their business model. They don't want to, period, flat out.
And this notion of what we might coin tonight is green transmission.
Yeah, I like the idea of green transmission. One thing that I will say, the utility company, their business is in owning energy assets. They're going to protect that vigorously. That's a very large part of what NEM 3 was. It wasn't necessarily about, trying to help consumers out. Obviously, it's been net negative. We've seen solar installs in the state fall off a cliff. It is largely about being able to protect their ability to bill, which we're seeing a lot of pushback, not only in the energy assets that are being deployed and who gets to own them, but also in the management of those systems. So there's huge pushback on, or at least slow rolling of things like virtual power plants and energy management systems that would actually give transparency to the market. But long term, as we look at what has happened to residential solar in the country, it's very clear that if it's within your capability to own your own energy assets at all, like now is definitely the time to be able to do it, so that you do have that say.
So maybe we rent our new underground system to them. Yeah, perfect.
Well, to be clear, and I don't know all the specifics on Del Mar, I won't even pretend to say I do. But there's two different things going on here. The reason those wires are going underground is because SD&E doesn't want to end up like PG&E and end up bankrupt because they caused something like the Paradise Fire that happened because of the failure of a dollar clip on an overhead wire. If we can get those wires underground, that makes it a lot safer in wildfire season, right? When it's dry. That's right. As far as green transmission, I spent a lot of my time as a journalist as a technology reporter. I covered Silicon Valley. I covered the rise of Google and Apple and all of that kind of stuff. And I learned a long time ago not to discount innovation and technology innovation. And just the things but you have to have the market signal for businesses to start to innovate. And we're just starting to see that. So for instance, there are companies that are coming out with new types of transformers now that work better, that go up easier, that can get out there quicker and move renewable energy around more quickly. The simple breaker boxes like Jamie was talking about now, energy management systems in your house. Utilities need to be thinking about those types of things too, at their circuit boards, if you will, circuit breaker boxes, if you will, and they're starting to do that because, again, we finally set some policy in this country.
Speaking of utility companies, and the
I don't think your mic's on. Is it show a green light?
it does now.
Okay. Hold it to your mouth. Hold it up to your mouth. Oh, it's flashing. Hang on. We'll switch out.
Okay. Okay. Since the utility companies were brought up, and since I believe the first question had to do with price, just to share some numbers that, to the best of my knowledge, are correct. Our local investor-owned utility monopoly raised electric rates an average of 10% a year for the past decade. In front of the Public Utilities Commission at this time is a proposal to raise electric rates 10% a year for the next 5 years. There's also a utility company proposal to build a new major solar farm near Borrego Springs, which would require a 135-mile, $2.3 billion, I call it extension cord, they call it transmission line, to get the power from where it's generated to the coast where it's actually used. Now look around us, and we have in San Diego County, in fact, in our Clean Energy Alliance area, 7 cities in the Clean Energy Alliance, we have literally thousands of acres of underutilized rooftops and parking lots. Now, is it a better business model to continue with business as usual with our investor-owned utility monopoly, or is it better for cities to show leadership and do things like build solar canopies over parking lots with battery charging and EV charging, even better, bi-directional EV charging, where people can drive to work, park their car, get a full charge, drive home, put juice back into their homes, and golly, then we flatten the duck curve in the process. So it's policy. I know it's about policy. And in my opinion, the Public Utilities Commission is not providing a level playing field between the 3 California major investor-owned utilities and we ratepayers.
Yeah, I mean,
so,
I mean, you said the opacity of these companies is really bad, and then of course the people who work at the IOUs work at the PUC and vice versa. I mean, so there is a lot of cahoots.
Well,
they might be in cahoots.
Even though we're in City Hall and I'm sitting behind this dais, I can't help you on city policy, but I agree with you. Cities ought to be putting more, cities ought to be getting more involved.
But is there an opportunity in the IRA that, for example, if cities were to build some solar farms over these parking lots, these massive parking lots that we have, do you know if there's any opportunity for cities? Because there's tax incentives for individuals.
Right. Churches,
production
nonprofits,
incentives, and all that kind of things. But
one of the areas that I see an opportunity that I think has gone underutilized is that they made it so that nonprofits, instead of having a tax credit that they were eligible for, is now actually a cash transfer. The only challenge with that is that I have yet to see any company who's actually built out any sort of department to help facilitate teaching people how to do that. So.
A few.
You have it? You've seen a few?
There are
I haven't seen too many of those, but I have a lot of confidence and optimism that that'll open the door for more of these projects to be deployed. One of the areas, though, that we do actually see more development is in like Native communities and lands, because they do have extra incentives that are available, and then also they can form a nonprofit and actually get the cash transfer if they were to take on ownership of those projects.
One of the things that you're kind of alluding to, and you're kind of alluding to too, with the green transmission, is we're talking about distributed energy sources, right? And eventually creating virtual power plants, which is kind of the one of the cool new buzzwords now. That's actually the biggest proponent is the head of the DOE Loan Guarantee Office. So there's a lot of money going out around that. Yeah. But imagine, there's if we had solar on all this stuff and we had electric vehicles that were bi-directional charging, which, by the way, the state of California just said car companies have to do that in the near future, then we would be the power plant.
so I think, are we running out of?
Yeah, how about one more question, if anybody has one?
I do have one, quick one, which takes us back, and it's maybe a simple one. What if you spent a bunch of money last year or the year before upgrading your house? So what if you just put in all new doors and windows, or you just put in a new electric stove or heat pump?
Think of the savings that you've accrued in those years.
Thank you. I had a feeling you were
Because
going
you
to
were
tell me
ahead of
that.
the curve.
Timing is everything.
No, they did actually allow for some retroactivity for some of the rebates, so you can go back and check on that.
And I'm with you, by the way. I'm in
Okay.
the same boat.
And
Just
let's have some hope here. That book, I think that you presented, you said, what if we succeed?
Yeah.
So let's look at it that way. What if we succeed?
Can I ask one question?
Of course.
Jamie, do you happen to know a great podcast if I was interested in this kind of stuff? Do you happen to know a podcast or something I could tune into that would be keep this learning going?
Yeah. So if these are topics and things that you're interested in, if you go to YouTube, you can go to The Clear Clean, and that's actually a podcast. Every single week, we bring on experts throughout the industry. It's basically insight by professionals who are actively working on these challenges. Bob knows because he was one of our esteemed guests. But
It's a great podcast.
it's a great opportunity to be able to figure out, to be able to learn what's really going on in the energy transition. And we have everybody we've had the senior policy director at ACEEE, we have startup founders, we have NGO leaders. Rewiring America was just recently on. So it's definitely a great space for you to be able to get
And you get
just
to hear from Jamie.
unfiltered information, and you'll see more of my face.
Bob and Jamie, this has been a wonderful presentation. I think these are more questions than we've ever had.
Well,
But
obviously,
thank
we
you
don't know
so
what we're
much.
talking about, or everybody would ask so many questions.
Thank you so much for being here. We really
Thank you.